as always, and as you know, all best wishes for everybody. For larger part of next month, spread across next month, we are going to enjoy the Constitution. I've also prepared a careful program of upcoming 18 sessions. Apart from this one, rest of the sessions will be 1.5 hours. This, I mean it to be 70-75 minutes. To study any subject in depth, there always have to be the sources. So here are some important sources for studying the Constitution. It's always my pleasure to generally recommend Subhash Kashyap's book, Our Constitution, as the first reading. You really want to begin to study the Constitution. And even as you begin to study the Constitution, you want to go on developing your knowledge to ever deeper level. Start with Subhash Kashyap, Our Constitution by Subhash Kashyap. I know that the book is also translated into Marathi, so those of us who are more comfortable or intend to write the exam in Marathi medium would also do well to read it in Marathi. Subhash Kashyap was Lok Sabha secretary for almost 40 years of his life. Apart from just being on that post, he is himself a supremely well-studied person and also committed to India. So it's not just profession for him. It's like at a point of time, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also had said that Constitution is my religion. For Subhash Kashyap also, this was his lifelong commitment. And the book is in a very simple language, very lucid language. That is a good starting point. Recently, Subhash Kashyap has also come out with another outstanding book with the name Indian Constitution, Issues, Problems, etc. After retirement, he used to write a regular column for various newspapers. And those are the issues, relevant issues at each given point of time. This is a cohesive collection, and in order to convert it into a proper book, he has also written some new things. It's a very original, I must tell you. It's not a standard like textbook type, or it's a very original thinking of a person who spent his life implementing and supervising the Constitution. Then, next to or along with Subhash Kashyap, one of the finest books to start our study of the Constitution is Introduction to the Constitution by D.D. Basu, Durgadas Basu. Introduction to the Constitution by D.D. Basu. D.D. Basu also has written a couple of other books based on the Constitution. You would do well to continue to read all those books also. Then one writer with two of his books. The writer is outstanding, both the books are outstanding. I describe that as a must read for everyone who wants to develop insight into the Constitution. Name of the writer is Granville Austin. Granville, Granville Austin. He is a British constitutional expert, but a British constitutional expert committed to India. First of his book is titled as Making of a Constitution. As the title makes it clear, the book focuses on how Indian Constitution came into being. It's a fascinating read. And then his own study of Indian Constitution and its implementation, and carefully watching India develop constitutional institutions. After some 35 years, India began implementing the constitution, he came out with another. The book is of a larger size. The first one is like some 350 pages. The next one I'm telling you runs into some 550 pages. The title of that book is Implement Democratic Constitution. Implementing Democratic Constitution. Somehow my mind is saying I'm making some mistake. Okay. Working of a constitution. Working. First book is Making of a Constitution. Second book is Working of a Constitution. This is very precise, at times kind of tough in terms of quality of English, and also he goes, the way he goes into the depth, it's also tough. But those of us who also, maybe their commitment to the constitution also goes beyond immediate preparation of the exam, that is of course there, and we are to score marks of course there. But this is a lifelong study, it has to go on. It's only like we are beginning the study. So Granville Austin is an absolute must. There is excellent book on Indian government and administration by Fadia, B.L. Fadia. B.L. Fadia, F-A-D-I-A. B.L. Fadia. Another excellent book on Indian administration. Of course, the entire backdrop is Indian Constitution, is by Professor Maheshwari. There is a 1500 page thick bunch written by Jain and Wadhwa. Indian Constitution by Jain and Wadhwa. This of course is a fascinating read. This is way deeper and with all examples, case laws, court verdicts, amendments, critical assessment of all those. It's a thick bunch. Whenever you decide to read, you can quietly read a couple of pages every day. Give yourself time to let all content sink in, and as you proceed, you will emerge a more enlightened person if you complete your reading of Jain and Wadhwa also. One part of the methodology that I always suggest is to go to the roots. Now, going to the roots also means refer to the original document. This would mean that for our study of the Constitution, we do not just depend on books written on the Constitution. At some point of our preparation, we need to read the original Constitution itself, from A to Z, Article 1 to like whatever 395 and 11 schedules now with all lists, etc. You need to really sit down and starting with the preamble, through all the articles and all appendices, read the Constitution at least once. That one good copy with commentary is by P.M. Bakshi. The Constitution, original Constitution by P.M. Bakshi. Lok Sabha Secretariat also has a commemorative volume of the original Constitution. We of course have one copy. My copy is in our library, and recently it has been a part of our discussion also. I hope you have been following the newspapers carefully, because this was pointed out that in the original Constitution there are regular pictures and paintings and photographs, and in its original form Indian Constitution is not averse to the original Indian civilization. So there is picture of Prabhu Shri Ram, Sita, Hanuman and Lakshman the Ram Panchayatan. There is Sri Krishna there. There are saint poets there. There are those rock edicts and sculptors over there. This rich heritage of India is adopted, enacted, internalized in the Constitution. As we proceed, maybe whenever we come up with critical analysis of India's version of secularism and socialism, we will go into the details. But the original volume, if ever you can take a look at it, those of us who can afford can really call for that copy from Delhi, and Amazon will deliver it to your home. It's a fascinating read. I suggested that as a part of our methodology, we need to go to the roots and refer to the original document. So establishing our grip over constitution would mean reading the original constitution, because you need to develop friendship with the style of the language. The constitution is written in a particular style. The style is, of course, legalese. Most of the founding fathers were barristers. And the most outstanding among them, of course, was Babasaheb Ambedkar himself. So the language is pretty sharp, pretty precise, but it's kind of legal language. And for our establishing grip over constitution, we need to read it in its original form. So like I suggested, P.M. Bakshi would be a good start. I wonder whether he spells B-A-K-S-H-I. Yeah, I think the original spelling is B-A-K-S-H-I. As the books may go on and on, and the list is unending, I'm choosing to close with Arun Shoury's name, one of the finest journalists that India has ever had. Arun Shoury is an economist in his own right and an outstanding expert in the Constitution. He has written, and many of his books are entirely based on the Constitution and critical analysis of the Constitution. One full book is about courts and judgments. It talks about the judiciary. There is another full book on Indian government, how bureaucracy has grown sclerotic and what steps we need to do. Another book is named The Secular Agenda, and it goes through the whole Constitution, the constitutional plan, and what is seen in the reality in the country. I don't know why I said this is the last one, because there is another one which can also be the first one and the last. What I mean to say is, you don't begin your study of the Constitution unless you read We the People by Nani Palkhiwala. It's a must read. Nani Palkhiwala, I think most of the experts will agree that Nani Palkhiwala was probably the best ever, the best constitutional expert ever, even so far. He used to write regular columns. He represented people in many important cases. During the days of emergency, national emergency, which of course we are going to study in the sessions to come, very few people had shown courage to stand up to Indira Ji during emergency. Nani Palkhiwala was one such. So he was like Yah Kriyavan Sa Pandita, the true Pandit. He was an activist committed to national welfare and an outstanding expert in the Constitution. His book, We the People. I know that this book also is translated into Marathi, so those of us who are more comfortable in Marathi can read in translation. काही चांगली पुस्तकं मराठीत सुद्धा आहेत. तेव्हा राज्यघटनेचा मराठीतून अभ्यास सुरू करायचा आहे तर जनरली माझी रेकमेंडेशन असते बाचल सरांचं, वी मा बाचल, भारतीय राज्यघटना. फर्ग्युसन कॉलेजचे प्राचार्य होते ते बाचल सर. माझ्याही शब्दात दुर्दैवाने अर्थातच आता ते आपल्यात नाहीत, पण त्यांचं ज्याला राज्यघटनेचा मराठीतून अभ्यास सुरू करायचा आहे त्यांनी बाचल सरांचं भारतीय राज्यघटना वाचावं. असे एक दुसरे थोर अभ्यासक यांनी तर राज्यशास्त्र आणि राज्यघटनेचा अभ्यास आणि आयुष्यभर ते शिकवणे यालाच वाहिलेलं जीवन होतं. ते म्हणजे प्राध्यापक भा ल भोळे ह्यांची सर्व पुस्तकं. तुम्हाला जर त्या पुस्तकावर लेखक भाल भोळे नाव दिसलं, डोळे मिटून उचला आणि डोळे उघडून वाचा. वाचल्यानंतर डोळे तर उघडतीलच ह्याची मलाच खात्री आहे, पण एक असं समर्पित आयुष्य मी सांगतो. ज्ञान साधनेला व्रतस्थपणे समर्पित असलेलं आयुष्य. तर एक भाल भोळे, त्यांची राज्यघटना, राज्यशास्त्र सर्व पुस्तकं. मराठवाड्यातले दुसरे एक प्राध्यापक सेम ना य डोळे, प्राध्यापक ना य डोळे ह्यांची राज्यघटनेवरची पुस्तकं आहेत. ज्यांना कोणाला जेव्हा केव्हा असं वाटेल की त्या राज्यघटनेमागचा राज्यशास्त्रीय विचार पण आपल्याला समजावून घ्यायचा असं ज्यांना वाटेल. तर ना जोशी ते फर्ग्युसनमध्ये होते प्राध्यापक. 3 खंडामध्ये आहे राजकीय विचारांचा इतिहास असंच नाव आहे पुस्तकाचं. 3 व्हॉल्यूम्स, राजकीय विचारांचा इतिहास असे 3 खंड आहेत. न्यायमूर्ती नरेंद्र चपळगावकर हे सातत्याने स्वतः न्यायाधीश असताना एक असामान्य न्यायाधीश, निवृत्तीनंतरही अभ्यास सतत चालू ठेवत उलट आयुष्यभराचा अभ्यासपणाला लावून जे लेखन करतात. तर राज्यघटनेच्या अंमलबजावणीची 50 वर्ष पूर्ण होताना त्यांनी राज्यघटनेची 50 वर्ष ह्या नावाचंच पुस्तक लिहिलं होतं. पहिली 50 वर्ष म्हणजे हे 2000च्या आसपास प्रकाशित झालेलं पुस्तक आहे. तर राज्यघटनेची 50 वर्षे. त्यांचं राखीव जागांचा प्रश्न आणि सगळी त्याची घटनात्मक व्यवस्था आणि राखीव जागांची अंमलबजावणी, विकसित होत गेलेले नवे नवे सगळे विषय ह्याच्यावरचं खरी ही न्यायाची रीत असं पुस्तकाचं नाव आहे. हा महात्मा फुलेंच्या अखंड म्हणजे अभंग त्यातली एक ओळ आहे. खरी ही न्याय जात जातीच्या प्रमाणात कामे वाटून द्यावीत खरी ही न्यायाची रीत असे एखादा शब्द माझा कुठेतरी थोडा इकडे तिकडे होत असेल, पण हे मूळचं महात्मा फुलेंनी 19व्या शतकाच्या उत्तरार्धात कल्पना सुचवताना जी शाहू महाराजांनी पुढे अंमलात आणली आणि करायचाच आहे पुढे आपला. पण त्याचा एक अतिशय सखोल अभ्यास नरेंद्र चपळगावकरांचं हे पुस्तक खरी ही न्यायाची रीत. त्यानंतर विधिमंडळे आणि न्यायालय असं त्यांच्या एका वाटायला छोटंसं पण जॅम पॅक्ट म्हणजे आशय जबरदस्त आहे त्यातला. द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन लेजिस्लेचर अँड एक्झिक्युटिव्ह, लेजिस्लेचर अँड ज्युडिशरी, विधिमंडळे आणि न्यायालय. त्यांचं 3 न्यायमूर्ती या नावाचं एक छान पुस्तक आहे. हाऊ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन डेव्हलप्ड ड्युरिंग फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल. त्याला ह्या पुस्तकाचा नितांत उपयोग आहे. न्यायमूर्ती चंद्रशेखर धर्माधिकारी ह्यांनी उत्तम पुस्तक लिहिलेलं असेल तर काही विशेष नाही, लिहायलाच पाहिजे. ते स्वतःही न्यायाधीश असतानाही एक अत्यंत असामान्य न्यायाधीश. त्याही काळात वेळोवेळी लेखन केले. त्यांची कलेक्शन्स प्रसिद्ध झालेली, त्यांची राज्यघटना कायद्यांवरची सर्वच पुस्तकं. अशीच यादी पुढे भरपूर चालू राहील, पण मी शेवटची 2 नावं सांगून आपल्या पुढच्या विषयाकडे सरकतोय. एक आहे जुन्या पिढीचे. मी तुम्हाला खरंच मनापासून म्हणतोय की त्यांना तुम्ही मिस करत असाल. मी काय आहे मला माहिती आहे, ते काही मी वैयक्तिक बोलून जे गर्वाचं वाटतं तसं बोलणार नाही. तुम्हाला कळलं तर आनंदच आहे, नाही कळलं तर काही दुःख नाही अर्थातच. पण SP कॉलेजमध्ये शिकवणारे प्राध्यापक पु. सहस्रबुद्धे जे आपल्यामधून गेल्यालाही आता खूप वर्ष झाली, पण माझ्या मनामध्ये ज्या वर्णनालाच एक फार वरचं स्थान आहे, फार आदराचं. आणि म्हणजे वापरले ते मी भोळे सरांना उद्देशून वापरले शब्द असे. हे शेवटची 2 अशी नावं सांगतो की आपल्या विषयाला समर्पण हा शब्द आहे. कमिटमेंट अँड कंटिन्युअल परसूट ऑफ नॉलेज, आयुष्यभरची एक अखंड ज्ञानसाधना. तर मला जरा आज माझं काळीज हालतं हे सांगतोय की अशी किती भोवती दिसतात आत्ता, तर जरा दुर्मिळ आहे बुवा. आय एम सॉरी. ज्या सहजपणाने मी तुम्हाला दुर्गा भागवत, प्रभाकर पाध्ये आणि यादीच्या यादी चालू राहील, मोठी आहे यादी. आय मिस ऑल ऑफ देम. आय मिस, आय एम टेलिंग यू. तर हे पु. सहस्रबुद्धे सर असे होते. त्यांची सर्व पुस्तकं हे सांगतोय, सर्व. उदाहरणार्थ त्यांच्या एका पुस्तकाचं नाव आहे लोकसत्तेला दंडसत्तेचे आव्हान, असं पुस्तकाचं नाव आहे. दुसरं अप्रतिम पुस्तक त्याचं नाव इहवादी शासन, द सेक्युलर गव्हर्नमेंट. इहवादी, सेक्युलरचा करेक्ट मराठी खरं म्हणजे निधर्मी, धर्मनिरपेक्ष. त्याचा आशयाच्या दृष्टीने सगळ्यात योग्य अनुवाद होतो इहवादी. आणि तुम्हाला पु. सहस्रबुद्धे सरांचं मिळेल ते वाचावं. आत्ता ऑलरेडी मी प्रभाकर पाध्येंचं नाव घेतलं. त्यांचं राज्यघटना आणि कायद्याला धरूनचे अनेक चिकित्सक पुस्तकं आहेत. मराठीत तूर्त बोलताना आणि नावं अशी चालू राहतील. अर्थातच ही यादी काही ऑल इन्क्लुझिव्ह नाही, पण आपल्यातून काही काळापूर्वी म्हणजे फार नाही झाला पण प्राध्यापक राम बापट हे आपल्या पुणे विद्यापीठात राज्यशास्त्र विषय शिकवत असत. ते प्राध्यापकही होते आणि सक्रिय कार्यकर्ता पण होते समाजातला. अगेन आपली व्याख्या, भारतीय व्याख्या, या क्रियावान स पंडिता. तर उदाहरणार्थ त्यांचं 6 प्रस्तावना या नावाचं एक पुस्तक आहे आणि वेळोवेळी अनेक आहेत. पण राज्यघटना, राज्यशास्त्र या विषयांचा जबरदस्त अभ्यास, ह्याच्या सर्वासेत आपल्याला ते सर्व शोषून घेऊन ॲक्च्युली आपलं काम त्यांच्याहून अधिक उंची गाठणे, सखोल होणे. सो लेट दिस जर्नी स्टार्ट and whatever we come across. Then there are also regular columns in the newspapers. I personally happen to respect Surjit Bhalla, who is basically an economist, but whatever he writes, he reflects a keen understanding of the constitution every once in a while. Another of my personal favorite columnist is Tavleen Singh, committed to the country, genuine, impartial. She doesn't spare anyone. And if something she wants to say something is good, then no kind of prejudice or bias stops her from actually saying that, okay, this is good. But it's truly impartial and basically based on within the framework of the Constitution. Such kind of, if we follow the columns, some of the blogs, and whatever you follow on Facebook, Twitter, etc., our journey ever deeper into the Constitution. And of course, it is a fascinating journey that will begin and that will go on and on and on. So here is a simplest possible definition of the Constitution. What is Constitution? It's a written or unwritten set of rules which the whole society and government agrees to follow. That one line says a lot. It could be written, but it doesn't have to be written. The British Constitution is an unwritten constitution. It's called the British Common Law. So it could be unwritten also. Set of rules, regulations, norms that the whole society agrees to follow, that we are going to abide by this. Functioning of the society, including government, etc., will be controlled, directed, supervised by these. These are the guiding principles. That is Constitution with capital C. There is a general narrative under which we are told that in the ancient time, kings used to have all the power. The most summary but the best description of king's power is that the kings would have power of life and death over people. In short, kings would be lawmakers, law implementers, and also adjudicators. All concentration of power. Another fine English description is that the kings would be judge, jury, and executioner, all together, all in one. And then, for whatever are the reasons that emanate from European history, the historical development and evolution of the concept called Constitution begins. It is 1215 when the King of England wanted to undertake some war. 1215 is that time of the European history which is properly described as feudalism. It's a pyramidal structure of society based on economic being in the society, with king at the top, followed by his barons and knights and lords at the bottom, where common people with no rights, they were then called as serf, landless laborers. This is an economic organization of the society. King was at the top. But king would not maintain standing professional armies. So whenever a king wanted to undertake a military expedition, he would issue an edict asking his knights and barons to collect their army and join, and accordingly he would proceed on his expedition. The year is 1215. He issued an edict asking his knights and barons to join. They didn't want to join. They had their own reason. They didn't want to join. So many of them came together and pressurized the king to sit around a round table and discuss before you issue the order and we have to follow. But sorry, we don't want to follow this. This is the condition. Such a meeting happened at Ganymede, Runnymede, whatever. Is it G or R? We'll confirm that. उससे कोई आसमान नहीं गिर जाएगा. At Ganymede, about 40 kilometers from London, on the banks of the river Thames. This was like a round table meeting, and a discussion of the king with his knights and barons happened, and all of them agreed that we will prepare a written set of rules, and all of us, including the king, will abide by this written set of rules. That written set of rules is known as Magna Charta. Some people pronounce it Magna Carta. If you are going to have good time by pronouncing that, it's well and good. Depends on who is the Carta. The significance of Magna Charta or Magna Carta is, it is in the recent history of humanity. This is the first ever document prepared, and kings and knights and barons and all said, we will abide by this document. Magna Charta is considered as the starting point of evolution of democracy also, and evolution of the concept of constitution also. Because until then, generally it was understood, and so we are told, that the kings had power of life and death. Kings were above law. Kings could make law, but they were not subject to laws. With Magna Charta, it begins to happen for the first time that even kings agree that we also will abide by the following set of rules. That Magna Charta, therefore, is considered as evolution of modern democracy and constitution. It's an undeniable fact that in the modern sense of the term, modern democracy begins to evolve in Britain. So the parliament came into existence. The king still had all the powers with him. People would begin to send their representatives to the parliament, or the parliamentary seats could actually be bought legally, not the way we do it here. This was legally. And then the conflict between the king and the parliament rose up in 1648. Charles I would issue many orders. There was an issue of further taxation. The Parliament, under the leadership of Sir Oliver Cromwell, took a stand that power to levy taxes is with the Parliament. The king disagreed. That became a flashpoint, and that is the only civil war in British history. It went on from 1648 to 1664. This was loyalists versus republicans. Those who stood on the side of the king are described as loyalists. And those who were under the leadership of Sir Oliver Cromwell were fighting for establishment of republic, democratic republic. The civil war went on. This is the only time British people hanged their own king. That was Charles I. But in about another 40 years, it so happens that maybe the British people felt sorry about hanging their own king. That place is at Piccadilly Circus in Trafalgar Square. At Trafalgar Square in London, the place is still shown that Charles I was hanged over here. Charles II was recalled from Spain and was coronated, and he agreed that the further position will be where all kinds of laws will be made by the Parliament. King's position will be head of state, but king will abide by what the parliament decides. This happened in 1688, and this is described as the glorious revolution, or also the bloodless revolution of British history. With every next step, democratic institutions begin to rise up. Then come the French thinkers who prepared encyclopedia of human knowledge. They are called encyclopedists. They were in the early part of the 18th century. They started discussing the idea of having written set of rules and the whole society to be governed by those written set of rules, including the king. I am kind of hoping that you have noticed that the significance of Magna Charta is that the king's powers are no more absolute powers. And king is not above law. That now here is a modern process under which even kings get subjected to the laws. Then among the French thinkers are, of course, Rousseau, with his concept of general will, that people's will. And even the rulers must submit themselves to people's will. Rousseau's word is general will. Voltaire, one of the greatest thinkers of all times, defined liberalism, which is the backbone of democracy. There cannot be democracy without liberalism. Voltaire defined liberalism, and he probably also has offered the best definition of liberalism. Voltaire's quotable quote is, "I may not agree with you, my friend, but I will stand by you for your right to say what you want to say." This is probably the best codification of the term liberalism. Then the one we are required to notice over here is Montesquieu. Now you find out the French spelling. I never take the risk of explaining the French spelling. Montesquieu, S-Q-U-I-E, etc., etc. M-O-N-T-E-S-Q-U-I-E-I-E-I-E. The original name of his French book is Esprit des Dies, des Laws. Its English translation is Spirit of the Laws. In his book, he spoke about avoiding concentration of power. That age-old adage in political science, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there should be division of power. There should be decentralization of power. And power should not rest in a person, power should rest in an institution, in an institution. And on given any power, there should be principle of checks and balances. There should be checks on power. And various political institutions must balance each other. That is a guarantee of liberty. That is a guarantee of person's liberty, people's liberty. Montesquieu picked up these principles, division of power, decentralization of power, and principle of checks and balances. One institution should be supervised by other institutions, who in turn would be further supervised by other institutions. Avoid concentration of power. It's not like king is a hereditary dictator enjoying all the powers. Now Montesquieu, in making all these valid points, ended up by having kind of a misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the British system, mind you. He was writing in 18th century. And while explaining this point, he said, look at the British political system. There, the task of making law is separated from the task of implementing law. The two are exclusive. And still there is another institution which supervises over first two institutions. Montesquieu really defined legislature, executive and judiciary. This is his plan for division of power. Now, three pillars on which all democracies in the world stand. What happened is Montesquieu thought that this is there in British democracy. When he was writing the book, it wasn't there. He kind of misconceived it. He kind of misconceived British system. When Montesquieu was writing this book, Spirit of the Laws, there was no such division of power in British democracy. But Montesquieu thought or misrepresented, ended up by giving the credit where it didn't lie. But he presented the idea of division of power and creating checks and balances. And then enter the French Revolution, beginning with July 14, 1789. Over here in India, we are generally not told about the significance of the American Constitution. Here is a country for the first time, a nation state in the world, which comes into being because people sit together and decide that we are creating United States of America. All other nation states are a product of history, and they may have evolved through history and may share common culture and civilization and norms and maybe the religion or subsect, etc., etc. United States of America is that country in the world where people sat together at Philadelphia in Continental Congress, which happened twice, and decided to constitute United States of America. And then after these Continental Congresses at Philadelphia, followed by Boston Tea Party and opposition to the Stamp Act and Registration Act, finally the American War of Independence broke out on 4th of July 1776. That is also considered as the foundation day of United States of America. 4th of July 1776 is also the date on which Declaration of Independence was made. This was Thomas Jefferson who prepared and declared the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence starts with the words, "We the people." India practically draws our own preamble from Thomas Jefferson drafted Declaration of Independence. Sometimes the word becomes so much of a part of our regular living that I wonder, or I am afraid, whether we miss the profound significance of what is being said. This is not just a figure of speech or some emotional outburst, "We the people." Here are people in 13 colonies sitting together at Philadelphia and saying that it is people's wish. The country called United States of America, eventually which also developed its own constitution, which went into action after 1782 and during the time frame of 1782 to 1790, the American Constitution. It's a very small one, but the American Constitution. Declaration of Independence is a path-breaking beginning for the whole world for the last 240 years. The concept, "We the people." That the state, capital S, is not the king, or not the people, not those who are sitting in positions of power, but state means people. And people's wishes are to be articulated, are to be internalized. Various institutions are there to look after people's wishes. All this is there in the term, "We the people." So we took that term, "We the people," from American Declaration of Independence. There is no denying the fact that India in general, and of course our democracy and our constitution, has a deep influence of the French Revolution. The greatest influence of the French Revolution are these three words: liberty, equality, and fraternity, which find a place in the preamble which declares the objectives of the Constitution. That modern India will be based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Then through the historical evolution and to what I always describe as our misfortune, we came to be gradually conquered by Britishers. As British rule went on expanding through Indian subcontinent, they started creating modern institutions which become the starting point of evolution of Indian democracy. Through that rest of our journey to 1947 and beyond 1947, we are here to pay careful attention to all of this. This is the mainstream narrative of how the concept of Constitution came into being and some landmark turning points. What slightly pains me, the days are changing, and we are here to bring about that change. But what slightly pains me is what I describe as our intellectual slavery. That in our mental, intellectual, psychological slavery, generally the way our syllabi are presented, generally the way we are taught the subjects, we are never told that India also had a rich heritage of political thought. That is at the most at a footnote kind of thing. And how wrong it is. Because the idea that king is an absolute ruler with power of life and death over people is not Indian concept. It's a Western concept. It's in the history of the West that the kings had overwhelming power, like Louis XIV, a capable and a tyrannical ruler of France who ruled France for larger part of 18th century. He used to say, I am the state. I am the state. What is state after all? State with capital. He used to say, I am the state. King having power of life and death over people is not an Indian concept. Up till the medieval times, it is the Western concept. And at the most, one can say that that seems to be derived from the ancient Egyptian history. Like pharaohs are considered the epitome of absolute power over people and whims of the king. And king wants to kill somebody, king can simply kill. There is nobody to ask the king why you did this. Are you accountable? And explain your action. That is not Indian concept. Never was, mind you. Right from Vedas, through the Buddhist political thought which is there in Majjhima Nikaya, the Indian concept of king is not an absolute ruler, that of absolute ruler. Since ancient times, the kings are subject to law. Kings are not above law. Kings are subject to law. Kings are required to be answerable to people. Kings also have code of conduct. And if the kings do not follow those laws, if the king becomes debauched at personal level, loses character, starts oppressing people, ancient Indian political thought says that people have every right to remove him from the place. You will find it in Vedas. You will find it in Ramayana. And a whole massive book called Yoga Vasishtha, one of the fantastic pieces of ancient Indian literature. The whole book is written, it's an explanation of statecraft by Vasishtha for Sri Ram. When now Ram is to be coronated as the next king, here is his guru Vasishtha explaining to him duties of the king and powers of the king and king's commitment to people. If one is not poisoned with the so-called critical analysis of Indian civilization, as long as it is not poisoned, all analysis, all chikitsa, critique is most welcome. But Rama himself is one of the ideals of Indian ruling, Indian concept, in even the political concept. Even the term Rama Rajya, which was rightly picked up by Gandhiji to describe his dream of what kind of India he wants to be. Rama Rajya is rule of law, is for justice, for common people, where the king is so committed to the common people. King's living himself is a simple one. So the concept of Rama Rajya. In Mahabharata, in Shanti Parva, Bhishmacharya explains statecraft to Yudhishthira. That now the 18-day Mahabharata war is about to be over, and Yudhishthira would be coronated as the Chakravartin, the sovereign emperor of Bharatvarsha. Here is Bhishma, the great. Bhishma, with lifetime of his experience, explaining to Yudhishthira the whole art and science of statecraft. Among the best ones is, of course, the very name that we picked up for our educational work. That, as I am expecting most of you to remember, we did it consciously. Chanakya is one of the greatest, all-time greatest thinkers of universal history. And Chanakya's Arthashastra, which was lost to the world, was rediscovered by Shama Shastri, a Kannada Pandit. Shama Shastri in 1907. Otherwise, until then, Chanakya's Arthashastra was lost. If and whenever you find time to read it originally, tell yourself that Indian civilization had lost this for like about a millennia or so before 1907. Arthashastra is full of great wisdom. And Chanakya himself says that what he is writing in Arthashastra is nothing new. He attributes his wisdom to 33 predecessors. He has named those 33. They are all political thinkers. He has named. He says these are 33. It's like acknowledgement or thanksgiving in modern books. That I learned from this. These are my predecessors, and I develop my theory based on inputs from these people. Chanakya refers to 32 such people. So India has a rich heritage of political thought. I'll just repeat, because of the importance of the issue, that we are never told this very properly. For example, again, we are told that it is Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau who defined the modern theory of social contract. How did the kings come into being? One theory says that the kings were representatives of God on this earth. Therefore, people were not really people, they were subjects. And the job of the subjects was to have unquestioned surrender and loyalty to the king, because king represented God. This is called the divine theory of kingship. But as against that divine theory of kingship, another theory says that people sat together and maybe decided that like 2, 3, 4 of you will look after the welfare of the entire, like it is tribal land or a small ancient Paleolithic, Neolithic village which may be attacked by an adjacent village. So how are we going to protect our village? So people picked up the strongest among them, entrusted the task of protecting their village, and for them to be able to do this task, people said, we will pay you something. That becomes starting point of tax structure, taxation and birth of ruling class. But this is social contract, that people sat together and people entrusted the responsibility of looking after welfare of the entire, like whatever, tribe or society. This is social contract. Rulers are rulers with the consent of the ruled. So there is no question of subjects and no question of unquestioned loyalty. Actually, Chanakya defines it the best way. Chanakya says that the king is king because people have asked him to be the king. Chanakya says king is king because people have allowed him to be the king. Chanakya lays down code of conduct for the king. And that code of conduct is down to such details as to what time the king should get up and practice yoga regularly and keep 2 hours in a day open for any citizen to come and meet him without any prior appointment, and rest of the statecraft. The whole book is full of wisdom. Chanakya also goes on to say that if the king is neglecting his duties or is tyrannical to the people or is debauched character, please remember the list. Chanakya also says if the king levies unfair taxes on people, people have every right to remove him. So much so that Chanakya says that people have right to kill a tyrannical king. It is social contract. And look at Buddha's Shakya clan, the Shakya Kula, or also a whole rich tradition of grassroots democracy in the Chola polity of Deep South in Tamil Nadu. There is democracy in action. There are elected representatives. People would sit together and vote and elect their representatives. And those representatives were entrusted with the task of looking after welfare and development and security, abiding by the laws. There are unmistakable signs of democracy, that to the grassroots democracy in India. Deepest south is the Chola polity. It is inspiring. The emperors also did not have any right to interfere in a village. Eventually, Gandhiji's idea of village republic is based on this perception. The villages were economically, financially, like self-dependent units. And there would be Grama Sabha. Everyone above age 21 would sit together and elect, say, 5 members from among them. There would be no elections, no ballot paper, no political parties, and no political propaganda, Taimai Akka, Majar Mara Chikka. People would sit together and say, okay, we want these 5 people. Pancha, we want these 5 people to now look after the village. There are rules laid down for who can be elected for administering the village. That such a person has to be above age 35. That such a person has to have a minimum record of selfless service to village for at least 10 years. That person should be a person of clean character. He should have paid all loans and everything. I wonder whether about 90% of our parliament will have to be dismissed. And then such people beyond age 35 would be picked up. It's not like unnecessary pride for ancient Indian heritage. In fact, we need to study scientifically. Whenever people discuss why democracy has survived in India and why the constitution took roots in India, people keep on saying very many reasons. Here are deeper reasons. That democratic spirit is inbuilt in the Indian civilization itself. Since times immemorial and right from the start of our civilization, we are liberal people because we have understood ekam sad vipraha bahudha vadanti. That truth is one, but there are different paths to lead to the same truth. So there is no undue insistence on a single, you can also say a god, or a single like Murti, or only my God and my prophet and my book and my institution of religion, which comes into political fight with the political structure, necessitating emergence of secularism in the Western civilization. We are liberal people, we are plural people, we welcome diversity. We don't just welcome diversity, we respect diversity. And that is because we understand that it is the diversity of expression, manifestation, while there is inner oneness. That ehsas, the realization of inner oneness and external or diversity in manifestation is basically the foundation of democracy. that everyone can have one's own opinion. It's the foundation of freedom of expression. And everyone's freedom of expression is to be respected. Like I always like to say, that while generally Indian heritage is, so to say, astic, theist, Charvaka is atheist, and he says there is no Atma and there is no Purva Janma and Punarjanma. This is all bullshit created by Brahmin class to exploit people. So how do we treat Charvak? Is he tied to a pillar and burnt at the stake? Is he crucified? Even Charvak is respected as Rishi. And his philosophy comes to be called as Lokayata. The heart and soul of Indian civilization is democratic. Modern evolution comes up with a modern form for India's timeless immemorial soul. So the Constitution, while it picks up from best of the parts from different parts of the world, the Constitution enshrines India's soul. That actually is the reason why democracy took roots, why the Constitution has survived. And I don't think anyone will ever doubt that democracy and Constitution in the country is in trouble. Unless, of course, you have lost the election and you want to say that the situation in the country is worse than national emergency. It beats me. Or you want to say people listen to only one person. All it means is, I am sorry people don't listen to me. Our democracy is vibrant. Our Constitution has taken roots. And while there are many problems we need to deal, the problems are of a very serious nature. Every Indian citizen has every reason to be optimistic and happy about the Constitution. That is the whole evolution of how the Constitution came into being. That is our part 2, next part. I intend to close this one with what I call as the finest comment on the Constitution. The finest, the best comment. If anyone ever asks me to pick up a comment. By the way, there was one proposal for a Gandhian Constitution. As India headed for independence, there was a pre-independence Constituent Assembly. And then, of course, to our misfortune, the final fatal decision of partitioning the country was announced and accepted on June 3, 1947. That split the Constituent Assembly. Pakistan we are going to discuss them on day after tomorrow. But India decided to continue the Constituent Assembly. When this was being discussed, there was a whole proposal of a fundamentally different constitution that is generally called the Gandhian Constitution. That is based on direct democracy at grassroots level. The starting point is direct democracy at grassroots level. That as village, or if it is a town at the ward level, all people will sit together to take decisions. For day-to-day administration, those people may elect their representatives. But then, there were 4 layers of the country imagined. The whole country was organized in 4 layers. All these intervening layers were to come into existence through indirect elections. That is, these elected representatives at grassroots level would elect their representatives at taluka level. The elected thus indirectly elected representatives at taluka level would elect elected representatives at district level. They at district level will elect those at state level, and those at state level will finally elect those at the national level. And then at the most, the highest head of government may also be directly elected from among the people. Gandhiji had actually reorganized the constitution of Indian National Congress on these lines. Hind Swarajya was published in 1915. And then he was entrusted with the task, and then he reorganized Indian National Congress on these lines. There would be a primary member of Congress party. Those primary members at like village level would elect their village Congress committee. And the members of village Congress committee would elect members of Taluka Congress committee. Members of Taluka Congress committee would elect members of district Congress committee. And members of district Congress committee would elect members of state. And that was called provincial. They would elect the national, that is AICC, All India Congress Committee. But then the Congress president would be elected from direct voting. Primary members of Congress, and there would be national level election. This was a pattern also suggested for India's constitution. As I proceed for closing this session by quoting Babasaheb Ambedkar, I need to share my personal conviction with you. Even as I am full of not just respect but gratitude for our constitution and the way Constituent Assembly functioned. We are going to have one full session devoted to this fascinating chapter of the way our Constituent Assembly functioned. Even then, I am convinced that this Gandhian pattern of the Constitution would have served India better. That's my argument. That it would have served. It would have been original India. Indian political institutions would be drawn from our heritage and would be a natural evolutionary outgrowth. So there is nothing lacking. I mean, I'm not criticizing the Constitution. All I'm saying is the present Constitution in its form attends less to Indian heritage. And we directly borrowed the Westminster model and the multi-party system and also the electoral system of first past the line, and for better or for worse, this is how our journey goes on. But after careful study, my mind does say that we need to have incorporated the elements of Gandhian constitution. The only element you find today is the Panchayat Raj system and a three-tier idea of democratic decentralization and the institution of Panchayat Raj system. Finally, when the work of Constituent Assembly was over, and now the Constitution was to be dedicated to the country, Babasaheb Ambedkar was questioned by a journalist, how good is this Constitution? The question posed to him is, how good is this Constitution? Ambedkar's immortal answer, timeless answer, Ambedkar's great eternal answer to the question, how good is this Constitution? He said, the Constitution is as good or as bad as the people who would implement it. This is very significant. What I understand by his comment is that he says, we have done our best. But unless the people know what is written there, unless people are organized, unless people are awakened, unless people can assert and make democracy work, there is hardly anything that the written word in the Constitution can say. And also the people who would implement. So our legislature, executive, judiciary, which unfortunately is full of problems, even as I'm very optimistic about India's future in general and India's democracy in particular. Let us keep this comment in mind as we start going deeper from next session onwards. How good is this Constitution? The Constitution is as good or as bad as the people who would implement it.